Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The Point. I'm your guest host, Jimmy Dore. And before we get to today's show, we're on the eve of the vice presidential debate. And I haven't seen the Democrats freak out like this since Ralph Nader ran last. And, everybody is giving excuses for why President Obama gave such a bad performance. My favorite came from former Vice President Al Gore, who blamed the altitude. Yes, leave it to Al Gore to blame climate change for everything. And there's some truth to that, because I had to change planes in Denver one time, and in between gate 36 and 37, I forgot how Social Security worked. And everybody, today, Barack Obama, I just heard on the news today, he came out and said he was too polite to Mitt Romney. Yes, you don't have to worry that people are going to think you're the angry black man anymore. You can go ahead. Remember, in the third year, Jackie Robinson would spit in your face. Okay, now on that beautiful note, let's introduce our panel, ladies and gentlemen. We got with us today, Lynne Lyman is the California State Director of the Drug Policy Alliance, the nation's leading organization promoting alternatives to the war on drugs, criminal justice reform, harm reduction, and marijuana law reform. She formerly worked for the Nonprofit Advancement Project on Violence Reduction, Community Policing, and Criminal Justice Reform. Lynn, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Next to you is Paul Chabot, is an Iraq war veteran and former White House drug policy advisor to Clinton and Bush. He has 17 years in law enforcement experience and was a parole board commissioner, and today is a president of the national security consulting firm. He's also the author of The Eternal Battle Against Evil, a comprehensive strategy to fight terrorists, drug cartels, pirates, gangs, and organizational crime. He also has a part-time job at 7-Eleven. What else don't you do?
Thanks. Well, let me also add that I took the elevator up here to the studio, the third floor, so I feel a little bit of altitude sickness myself.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll do okay.
Hopefully. Get your head to take a nap.
Absolutely.
Okay. And next to him is Diane Lefer. She's an award-winning author whose works include The Blessing Next to the Wound, a story of art, activism, and transformation, co-authored with Colombian exile Hector Aristizabal. Did I say it right?
You're the first person who ever got it right. Congratulations.
Right. And the novel Nobody Wakes Up Pretty, by Jack Welch was the co-host of that, I think. No. She's also contributing writer to LA Progressive, Nuclear Vision, and Numero Sank. Thanks for being here, you guys.
Thank you.
We've got 3 great points this week. Later on, we're going to hear from education expert Deborah Meier on the Chicago teachers' strike and what it means for the future of education in America. And then later on, we're going to discuss the mainstream media or journalists' problem with calling liars liars when they lie on television. We're going to talk about that through the eyes of Tom Brokaw and Bob Schieffer. But right now, in segment 1, first we're going to talk about the unmitigated disaster that is the ongoing war on drugs. And to help us right now, we have Stephen Downing, a former deputy chief of the Los Angeles Police Department, with his point.
My name is Stephen Downing. I'm a former deputy chief from the Los Angeles Police Department who waged the war on drugs. After seeing how ineffective the drug war has been, I'm now working with other frustrated cops and criminal justice professionals as part of a group called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. My point today is that the war on drugs is not only a massive failure, but that it causes untold violence, waste, overdose deaths, addiction, and other untold harms. We need to replace our failed prohibitionist drug policies with a system of regulation and control. The current penalties against drugs prevent almost no one from using or abusing them. Instead of letting gangsters, cartels, and murderers control the drug trade and its immense profits, we should bring drug sales above ground where they can be regulated and taxed. Absolutely none of this is possible as long as prohibition continues. Luckily, it seems that more and more people are waking up to this reality. Major national polls show majority support for marijuana legalization, and 3 out of 4 voters think the overall drug war is a failure. Police officers like me and other members of LEAP are speaking out. Pat Robertson's now says it's time to legalize marijuana. It is my hope that the vast public support for reforming our drug laws can soon translate into political action. Anyone who wants more information about these terrible drug laws and what you can do to help to change them should visit www.copssaylegalizedrugs.com.
Okay, well, that was a nice point from that hippie, the pro-drug hippie. Now, our first question, let me turn it to you, Lynn. Are we seeing more and more of that, law enforcement officers coming out being pro-legalization?
We are, Jimmy. Unfortunately, that's right after they announce their retirement. So they will tell you, those who are still on duty, that they don't think it's working. But they won't say that publicly until they retire. It's a close-knit group, and they don't want to go against what the public position is.
So you haven't found any active duty policemen or any organization of active duty policemen who are also on the same page?
No, we have one district attorney in California, the DA for San Francisco, who does talk about the failures of the war on drugs and is in favor of decriminalizing possession. But he's pretty much the only law enforcement official in the state. So once they retire, we get them.
Now, Paul, let me turn to you now. I'm sure you have some rebuts to some of the stuff he said?
Just a few.
Okay, let's hear them.
You know, my good friend Steve Downing of LEAP, obviously I'm disappointed in his comments. I don't know where he lost his way. Let me say this, I'm 38 years old, I got over 25 years sobriety. When I was 12 years old, I went through rehab for marijuana, alcohol. I used to think like he did, and I think I grew up and something happened to him. But let's talk about the reality of where we are today. We don't have a war on drugs. In fact, we hate to call it that. And let's be honest, what is the war on drugs? We look at this as more as a cancer. We're trying to help a problem in our community. And I think we've done a very good job. Over a generation, drug use is down about 30%. Pretty big. I wouldn't call that a failure. But people say, how do you win the war on drugs? Well, my response is, how do you win the war on crime? How do you win the war on poverty? We're never going to eliminate drugs off our streets, so we don't give up and wave the white flag. I will say we've made great strides. All 6 marijuana initiatives that were trying to go to the ballot here in California, none of them garnered enough signatures. So the pro-marijuana industry is looking at other states today, because I think California, interestingly, is now taking a lead to help the other states learn about the failures of our experiment with marijuana, so-called medical marijuana.
Can I just, it's a stat of that drug use is down 30%. Where does that come from?
Well, if we look historically, and I will provide you all the stats, facts, and figures, let me also inject this point. Since 2008, drug usage is up, and pretty significantly.
Because Barack Obama's president.
Well, some people may say that, but look, the White House doesn't have a very serious program today to address drugs. They knocked the drugs czar position down a sub-cabinet. Right now in California leads the nation, about 11%. And 1 in 5 high school students today now using an illicit drug. So the last 4 years, we've had a 1% plus uptick more in California because of the medical marijuana issue. However, I think nationally, when we look at a generation, absolutely drug usage is down about 30%.
Can I jump in, please? Because there's a lot of numbers flying around.
Let me just,
I need
let's
to
get her in
ask
first.
Paul,
Okay, go ahead.
I really respect a lot of the work you did. I told you I loved your
Sure, thank
dissertation
you.
on the
Thank you.
cartel. My problem is that taking the law enforcement approach to drug use has had a devastating effect on communities of color. White people smoke as much marijuana as anyone else, but it's the black and brown kids who end up going to prison. Because you yourself went into rehab at the age of 12. I don't understand why you don't support a public health model to addressing this rather than a criminalization model.
Great point. And absolutely. In fact, we support education, prevention, treatment, and enforcement. I'm also president of Coalition Drug Free California, working with kids. I'm speaking at a Red Ribbon Week to youth. Absolutely, that's part of it. But we've got to have a balanced approach of education, prevention, treatment, and enforcement.
Well, until
on
we
this
have
problem.
equal law enforcement, I think we're causing more harm than good. We're devastating communities. We're putting parents in prison, then the kids go wild in the streets. We're deporting parents and leaving their kids in poverty. We're doing really bad
I don't
things in
think
all of our
anybody can
communities.
deny that it's selective enforcement. You don't deny that we selectively enforce our drug laws, right? You don't deny that.
First
So
off,
can I jump in, please? Because
Yes.
there is a lot of numbers jumping around
Okay.
there. So, and thank you, Diane, for some of the points you made. In particular, that none of us are saying that drug abuse is okay. None of us are saying that drugs cannot be or are never harmful. What we're saying is the way we deal with them right now through the criminal justice system is not working. There is a war on drugs, Paul. It was announced by Nixon, and it's been announced by every president since then. We have spent $1 trillion, over 45 million drug-related arrests. At any given night in America, 500,000 people are behind bars for drug arrests. 80% of that is for possession, not for sale. So there is a war on drugs. It's not working. It has devastated communities, and drugs are more widely available, cheaper, and more potent than they've ever been. So I have a hard time understanding why regulation is so terrifying to some folks.
I'll give you an example. First off, today, less than 0.07% of people are in prison for drug possession, and most of those
Not
are
true.
That's not true.
That's
That's
incorrect.
not even close to true. Paul,
That's
come
not
on,
true.
don't do that.
No,
Don't come on,
Listen,
you bullshit statistics.
hey,
That's
listen.
such a bullshit
That's not
statistic,
true.
Paul.
Look, I love you
I'm not
guys.
going to let you do
I
that.
love you guys.
I
I
don't
was a
love you that
commissioner.
much to let you lie on my shoulder.
I was a commissioner on the state parole board.
I know you were a
I
commissioner,
dealt
but
with
that is
zero.
4 out of 5 arrests for drugs are for possession.
No,
we know that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know
We do
where
know
you're
that.
getting your
Department
statistics.
of Justice, FBI.
It is not accurate.
Talk to the FBI. That's
Paul,
where I
if
get
I
my
close my
statistics.
I
eyes,
work the streets.
If I close my eyes, it's like Stephen Colbert is sitting here
Oh,
right
my
now. Honest to
goodness.
God. Honest to God. So, let's just. So you don't agree that the war on drugs is a failure? Because usually everybody pretty much agrees on that, except you.
We don't have a war on drugs. We have a war on drug legalization. They are corrupting our kids. Today, we have high school students who, out of a rite of passage, get a medical marijuana ID card at 18. They're selling it to their other high school students. I talk to
Actually,
kids.
the number one drug that high school students use are prescription drugs. They get out of their parents' cabinets, not marijuana.
And I will agree with you. However, prescription drugs has overtaken marijuana use. We're seeing that as a huge,
Wow.
huge,
That's pretty amazing,
huge
right? Yes,
it
epidemic.
is.
Alcohol, huge problem. But these wrongs don't make a right with prescription drugs. Marijuana is much more potent, 3% when I was smoking it when I was 12, to 16 to 33% potency.
What's the lethal dose for marijuana?
There is no lethal dose.
Oh, okay.
However, we do have more people.
Nobody has ever died from a marijuana overdose in the
But-
history of the
it's
world.
it's like you're putting a Band-Aid on a dead body. Half the country's drunk, the other half's on prescription drugs, and you're worried about people smoking pot.
we have more people driving high on our highways
The last three
than from
presidents,
alcohol.
and marijuana use and traffic fatalities, the correlation between alcohol is triple, quadruple, million times more. The last 3 presidents have all smoked marijuana. So, and then just yesterday, the LA City Council. Why did they repeal? Let me ask
I'll
you
tell
this.
you why.
Did they do
I
this?
can
So let
tell
me
you
just
all
tell people
about
what
that.
happened.
Here's why,
Let me
'cause
tell what happened.
Okay.
So they passed a law that was going to close down all the medical marijuana dispensaries in California and Los Angeles. And then just yesterday, instead of putting it on the ballot for the people to vote on that ordinance, they decided to repeal it, not to repeal that ordinance. Why'd they do that?
Because LA City can't even fix potholes. How are they going to fix pot stores, for crying out loud?
So why did they? Okay, that's
I
why.
have to say, I've been working closely with members of the City Council about how we can actually implement a sensible regulatory ordinance for medical marijuana. Cities all across the state have done this. I believe Los Angeles can do this. We are the biggest city. It is more challenging, but I believe we can and we will. And I think that there's City Council members who are very competent and will do this. The reason that they repealed it was that it would have cost a lot of money, effort, and time and attention if this went to the ballot.
And that's
and we
why?
know, we know which way it would have gone, right?
Which
we
way?
would have approved it. Well, the voter,
Yes.
right? So the
That's what I
public
thought. And
opinion
they
is
would have-
for it.
It would have embarrassed them, right?
Not that it would have embarrassed them. We just would have. It would have wasted time and undone their ban anyway, so they might as well undo it. Now they've come to the table and ready to work with those of us around sensible regulation.
Can I interject 2
Sure,
points?
sure. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm sorry, ma'am. You go right
You're
ahead.
going to let me go ahead. I want to talk a little bit about my experiences in Colombia and Mexico because I don't want to oversell the idea of decriminalization. I think it would be a great boon to communities here in Los Angeles, but I don't think it's going to break the cartels. They already know how to diversify. You take away one product. In Colombia, the cartels that are still, of course, exporting cocaine, but they are they're consolidating land to plant biofuels. They're planting African palm, wonderful green product, biofuels, but they consolidate that ground by being criminals, by killing people, driving them off their land. We are not going to destroy the cartels. We may decrease the number of people they employ. You cannot fight the war on drugs, whatever you want to call it, unless you're providing opportunity for education, you're providing jobs that provide a living wage, and also jobs that provide dignity, that people get a sense of identity and respect, which they think they get from being drug dealers. We have to deal with the problems in our communities, in Mexico and Colombia and in Los Angeles, because you're not going to defeat drugs any other way.
Paul, let me throw up a stat and we'll come right back to you. Can I put up the graphics about who's winning the war on drugs? because it's funny when you find out who's actually winning. The weapons manufacturers supply not only the DEA, Border Patrol, and local police forces, but they also provide drugs. So it would be weapons manufacturers are big winners. The private prison industry, 25% of industry profits come from long sentences for non-violent drug offenders. And Big Pharma is also a big winner, which maintains a monopoly over the sale of controlled substances and actively lobbies in favor of prosecuting the drug war. And here's the biggest winner that I think is the banks, right? Because when the banks were hurting, they started laundering drug money, right? And up to Wachovia laundered more than $420 billion in drug money for Mexican drug cartels. And you remember when they put all those people from Wachovia in prison, right? Never happened. Okay, so go ahead. You go ahead and make a point, Paul.
Hey, thanks. First, a few things. Less than 10% of California cities allow for marijuana dispensaries. Our coalitions across California have worked with over 200 cities today that have banned them. We have a few exceptions, LA, San Francisco. Let me also say California voters, bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats, defeated in 2010 Prop 19, which was to legalize marijuana. This is no longer really a Republican conservative issue, it's a family issue. And so this initiative, Prop 19, could not have been defeated without the help of Democrats. And for drug cartels, absolutely great point. We have to understand that cartels don't just peddle in dope. They do human smuggling, weapon smuggling, DVD smuggling. If we took away the drugs, they would still operate. What we're dealing with are terror networks, and the cartels along the border have inroads to all of our communities. We have to understand that we do have a war against drug cartels, we have a war against drug legalization, but not a war on our own people.
Yes, and that's a good point about the drug cartels will go into other businesses.
Well, they
Everybody
also get
knows.
an awful lot of their weapons from us. We train the police, we train the military, and they pass the weapons right on to the cartels.
Right. I
That's
mean,
part of
everybody.
our war
Right.
on
I mean,
drugs.
Al Capone, if it wasn't alcohol, it was going to be trading cards.
Or milk,
But,
actually. He was looking at milk, believe it or not. Yes.
Go ahead. You had to say something to say.
Well, I was going to say that it is true that Prop 19 didn't pass, but by just a couple of percentage points. So it was fairly evenly split, and that was the measure to legalize, to end prohibition. But what I did want to say is it changed the debate. It changed the debate nationally. And this time, in this election, there's 3 states who have marijuana legalization on the ballot. It will pass in at least one of them, maybe 2 of them, probably not all 3. So the debate is changing. It's going to come. I'm not really worried about that. We need to end prohibition. The question that I think we should be concerned about, and I think that we can have some common ground on, is how are we going to regulate it? We need to regulate and control marijuana, probably better than we do so with alcohol in California, but like an alcohol control state. How many drug dealers do you know who ask for ID? None.
Right.
Right? So I think it's a lot easier to get marijuana right now than it is to get alcohol or tobacco. And so the question is, how do we regulate and control this substance? It is a substance less harmful than some other substances that are on the market, like prescription drugs, like alcohol, like tobacco, but it is still a substance that we believe in a smart regulatory administration.
Let me ask Paul Eggs a question here. We got to wrap up this segment. You know, as a kid, once I smoked pot, I realized that everything they had told me about pot was a lie, and that what it did was breed disrespect for the law in me.
That's
and
right.
so how do you feel about that, people who feel that? Because even if you think marijuana is destructive, you will admit that other drugs are even more destructive, alcohol, prescription drugs. So if alcohol is legal and marijuana, which is less destructive, is illegal, and we put people in prison for it, how do we keep youth to respect the law?
You know, wonderful question. This is where we, I think, can all have agreement. Look, I'm a dad. I look at life simple. What kind of community do I want my kids to be raised in? We have to have a very honest discussion. I think the voters and people are smart. When the facts are presented fairly, people will make the right decision. What we're learning about marijuana today is not the marijuana of our generation. We look at testicular cancer, schizophrenia, anxiety, the mental complications associated with
all
marijuana.
those things.
Well,
That's right. Thank you.
But to go to regulation, which is what my colleague mentioned here, LA can't even regulate their dispensaries. This is an example here of why regulation in an illicit business doesn't work. And it's also
But
against...
we've regulated tobacco and alcohol.
But we have an $8 billion black market for tobacco. Just because we legalize or legitimize something doesn't do away with the black market or the health consequences
No,
of
it
that.
doesn't, but it decreases the crime and the collateral consequences that are surrounding that market. And I think what we've seen is that, especially for people of color, the prohibition has been devastating on communities.
Okay, that's going to be the last word on this segment. We'll be back with more when we talk about education and more on this week's episode of The Point. Hi, welcome back to The Point. We've got a great panel this week, and right now we're going to talk about our next subject is going to be education and the Chicago's teachers strike. And we're going to go to a point from Deborah Meier. She's a legendary American educator and founder of the Small Schools Movement. Let's take a look.
I'm Deborah Meier, and I've spent the last nearly 50 years working in public education in Chicago and Philadelphia, New York, and then the last 10 years in Boston. I started teaching kindergarten in Chicago, so I have a special feeling about the Chicago school system. The notion that 98% of the teachers in Chicago voted, and that 98% of those who voted to strike, it's unheard of. It's an expression of the amount of anger, resentment, and rage that so many teachers feel today when they're blamed for all the problems facing America. But this is just the beginning. And it's the first statement of we can do something about this. The relentlessness of the drive to privatize American public education. And the idea that only the free marketplace and profit motive can work successfully. And that this could be supported by people who are, generally speaking, liberals as well as conservatives. I think we're going down a very bad path, and Chicago teachers strike for a moment, and we'll have to see what comes from this, but for a moment, we saw another possibility. We could say no.
Okay, that was a great point by Deborah Meier, legendary educator. Right now, so Paul, let's go right to you now. Stop me when I say something wrong. You're for vouchers, right? You're for standardized testing.
Yes.
You're for merit pay.
Right.
Okay, charter schools, did I already say that already?
No, but you can get into that. We can.
Okay, so what do you think about the Chicago, in light of all that, so what do you think about the Chicago's teacher strike?
You know, I think there should have been a parent strike in Chicago with how pitiful their schools are. Hey, look, God bless the United States of America for the ability to go out there and speak your mind. But when the schools in Chicago are failing as miserably as they are today, it should have been the parents walking with their kids saying, teachers, school, something's broken here. Just to give you some information, they got a dropout rate in Chicago of 38%, graduated only 58% of their students. Look, the public school systems in America today, there are some good ones, I think, with good accountability systems, but overall, especially in the bigger systems, or God, look at our state of California. Went from having some of the best public schools in the nation to now some of the worst. And I think unions have been a part of the problem. I'd also like to, if I can, say hi to my mom because she's a public school teacher.
Oh, nice.
Yep, she teaches special education in the public school system. So I hear from her quite often. And my doctorate degree is in education. I have a huge passion for it, but our system is broken. We have other countries beating us out today, India, China, and others with our education system. Shame on us, we got to do better.
Okay, now let me just respond to that briefly. Chicago public schools are failing. Those statutes you quoted are all correct. I would say, isn't the bigger problem a problem of poverty? Because whenever we see public schools failing, it's never public schools in affluent neighborhoods. It's always public schools where the poverty is the highest, and kids show up at a disadvantage already. Can you speak to any of that?
Well, that's correct. And also what you see is that even public schools in more affluent neighborhoods, most of the neighborhood kids don't go to those schools. So you're seeing middle class and upper class families moving towards a private school system, which leaves a concentration of low income students and families in the public schools, which makes it that much harder to really work within the system. But I don't disagree with Paul that the system is failing. But I don't think it's teachers' fault. I think that teachers get a lot of flack that they don't deserve. I believe teachers work really hard and do an amazing job every day in our schools. There are some that need to go. And I think in terms of unions, we do need teacher unions, but they need to give a little. I believe that they serve a critical role.
Which way would you like them to give?
I think around this issue of firing the teachers that aren't doing a good job.
Okay, so you're saying, so it turns out what happens, Norm, so at the Chicago strike, they weren't really striking for money. What they were striking for was lower class sizes. They were things like air conditioning, things like a nurse in a school, so things to actually help.
Like basic.
Yeah, they're dealing with a population that has some of the highest rates of violence, dysfunctional families. There's kids. You look at Helen Ladd has maybe the most exhaustive study of how poverty affects kids' performance in school. It was done at Duke at the Sanford School of Public Policy. People want to look that up. Chicago has some of the worst circumstances for these kids. There was one counselor for each 1,000 children. That's part of what the teachers were asking for.
Didn't she also conclude that when you control for poverty, American schools outperform the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Yes, so people don't take into account that what we're really talking about when we talk about failing schools, we're talking about failing communities.
Yes.
We're talking about failing economics. And so somehow we think that we can fix all those problems with a teacher. And the problem with rehiring, what they're doing now is Rahm Emanuel and Arnie Duncan, two guys who don't teach, never taught, don't know anything about teaching, but are going to tell everybody else how to teach people, and they want things in schools that their kids have, but they don't want your kids to have them, like art and stuff. Their kids have it in their private schools, but you don't get it in your public school. And what they're missing is that it's not the teacher's fault, that it actually is the economy. It is poverty. It is that these kids show up less prepared. And when they say we need to try everything to fix our education, they don't mean everything. Because if you look to the people we're competing against internationally, like Finland, people point to Finland. So what they did was they added a teacher to every classroom. Right now there's 2 and 3 teachers for every class. There's 20 kids a class, and most teachers have a master's degree, and they're some of the highest paid people in the community. So they never talk about that when people say, let's try that.
Right.
They always go, let's try firing teachers more. Teachers aren't motivated by firings. Teachers aren't even motivated by money, or else they would go into another profession.
That's right.
They have intrinsic motivation to do a good job because they're professionals, and it's a vocation, right? Do you have any data to support that charter schools do better than regular public schools?
I don't have any data before me other than just talking to parents around the country. I've been to all 50 states, just talking to kids about community values. I will say, look at Chicago, one of the highest crime rates, murder rates, the crime epidemic, out of control. We talk about the crumbling of community values. Absolutely.
Yes.
What we have to understand is that gangs and drugs go hand in hand. We also have a lot of single parents out there. God bless them. They're working 2, 3 jobs, trying to support their family. But if a child does not have a parent to raise them, where's the parental influence to do the homework, to read to them? And shame on Chicago. They've got one of the shortest number of school days, 170. When we look at Chicago and they really want to better the system, they got to look inwards, but it begins with the PTAs. How many parents today show up to a PTA meeting?
As a single parent, I'd like to respond to this issue. And first to say, in terms of charter schools, I support charter schools. I don't see anything wrong with them. We
Do you
should
have
have
any data to
public
back up that
charter
they're better?
schools. There's data that goes both ways.
The data
but-
I've
but-
seen
but it
shows that
doesn't-
charter schools do not outperform regular public schools. In fact, 4 out of 5 charter schools perform worse or at the same level of the other public schools in their district, and they don't have to deal with things like unions, and they don't have to take all the bad kids.
Well, actually, in Los Angeles, the charter schools still have unionized teachers.
Well, it's a different kind of union.
Right, which is...
It's not the same kind of union, right? So they still have unions, but it's not a real union. It's all unions of... So go ahead.
There's
I'm
a
sorry.
little more flexibility in the system, which I
Okay.
support. I think teachers and administrators need more flexibility at the school level.
Right.
But in terms of being a single parent, let me tell you what's so hard with our school system. It's the fact that the class sizes are too large. So when my daughter went from 3rd grade to 4th grade, the cap went from 24 students to 37. And she couldn't make it in a class of 37 students. That was just too big, and I had to pull her out. Some of the other issues are, you don't have the wraparound pieces. You don't have the arts and the music, or you have them, but only a few kids get in them. And then as a single parent, the number one issue for me is what happens after school. I work till 5 o'clock, and I commute, so I can't get home till 6. And there are no programs. There really aren't.
In the public schools?
Right, there's one program which is pre-subscribed years ahead. I mean, you can't get into it. So what you get is you get the free after-school program. I'm lucky they have it, but there's no supervision. It's just they're locked in the yard. They can't get out. So you have 4 hours. Yeah, you have 4 hours at the end of the day that could be used for educational, art, music, vocation, all kinds of creative and interesting things. And instead, there's just sort of 4 hours of free-for-all.
Yes, that all costs money at a time when we're firing teachers.
Well, at a time when we're spending way more on prisons than we are on education.
Yes, and that's coming back to bite us right now, right?
Yes.
So what happened is we had an economic crash caused by Wall Street and the housing market, and immediately the way to fix that is they start firing teachers. So, because I guess the problem is we're too smart. That's the problem. We got to get dumber
the prisons
kids.
are the big example now because we have a lot of experience with prison privatization. We don't have as much experience with the public schools being privatized.
Right.
And what we see in the prison privatization, you take like the GEO group, one of the biggest groups running private prisons. Twice as much violence in their facilities as in facilities in the same state with a comparable population. Their CEO got paid over $5 million in compensation last year. So the guards they hire are practically minimum wage, they're untrained, they're underpaid, and they're understaffed. Our prisons in California are terribly, we know what the problems are here, but the private prisons are even worse. And what's going to happen when you privatize schools is that you're looking to pay executive compensation, you're looking to please the shareholders, you're looking to please Wall Street. The money isn't going into the teaching and into the kids. Back in the 60s, the mafia got its hands on public school funding in Providence, Rhode Island. I think, the mafia also was famous for looting pension funds, union pension funds. What we've seen, not just union pension funds, but Wall Street, all our pension funds took a hit with Wall Street. The new mafia is now looking at school funding. They're looking at profits to be made in the money that used to go to support public schools.
And money also being poured into standardized testing instead of into and
I was about to say something on standardized testing.
Can I just say that you said that the Chicago teachers' parents should be marching.
Absolutely.
And I saw a statistic that said 66% of the Chicago parents supported the strike,
Absolutely.
which you would think in this economy they would be going crazy.
Absolutely.
But they didn't. They actually were on the side of the teachers because the teachers weren't striking for selfish reasons, even though they were painted that way. They were striking to help the kids get a better education.
So where's the next strike? I mean, things I don't think are going to get better in Chicago. I think they're only going to get worse. We see the strike that made national headlines. Gridlock the city, kids not going to school, parents upset one way or another. But at the end of the day, is the system in Chicago the model for the United States of America? Absolutely not. When Barack Obama was running for president, he said, if there's ever a union strike, I'm going to be out there marching with you.
Yes.
He was absolutely quiet on this issue. He had an opportunity to lead, to talk about the most important thing to every single one of us, and that's education for our kids. I think that's one thing we can all agree on. And he was MIA.
Well, not to get into Obama right now, but in terms of standardized testing, in my opinion, that is one of the problems with public schools. It's why I have pulled, it's one of the 3 reasons why I pulled my daughter out of public school.
Does it not work?
Well, I think the problem with, I get it, we need standards, right? In any industry, we need standards. But what you have going on, and anybody who has a child in public school knows this, you have the teacher teaching to the test, rote memorization, over and over and over again, they've taken the creativity, the excitement out of learning. And my daughter walks away and says, I hate learning. And here she is, a bright child who tested gifted. A year later, she hates learning. And I think that has a lot to do with how many standardized tests they have to take, how often, and how the sort of rating system. And then the standardized tests also contribute to what I call the push-out problem. It's not a dropout problem. We push out students out of our public schools. We push out the ones who test lower. We push out the ones who have behavior problems. And we're treating really normal adolescent behavior in many instances like a crime. And we've created what we call the school-to-prison pipeline, which is fueling this need for more and more prisons that we're talking about in the private prisons, instead of finding a way to keep our kids in the school, even if they don't test so well, even if they do have some behavior issues. So I feel like we say we'll throw anything at the problem. We're often throwing the wrong thing at the problem.
I agree. We're always throwing the wrong thing at the problem. We're using this, corporatization of education, punishing the teachers, instead of doing things that, because right now we know that most of the teachers don't come from the top third of their graduating class. They come from their bottom third of the graduating class. And nobody's sitting around going, how do we get the smartest people to come into teaching? Not that the people who are teaching aren't bright, dedicated professionals. They are. They're all college educated and trained. But it's like, why do we give financial incentives everywhere else in our economy except to teachers? We think that as a teacher, I've heard people during the Chicago teacher strike saying in a very bemoaning that, Chicago teachers make $75,000 a year. Is that the kind of world we want to live in, where teachers make a modest living? Is that really where we want to live, where educators don't drive junky cars? I don't think we want to live in that country.
In Chicago, these teachers are making $74,000+
Yes,
a year.
it should be double.
It should be double.
It should be double.
Well, okay.
Would you teach an inner city school in Chicago for $75,000 a year?
Oh, hey, I think a lot of people today unemployed under this administration would
that's
take
the-
that job in a heartbeat.
But you have to
Political
have a
plug.
degree in order to.
Yes.
Well, but let me just
Don't
address
just want to grab people off the street.
two tough love points. We could talk
And these
about,
are our last points, and then we're out. So go ahead. You get the last word, Paul.
we can talk about the teachers, the unions, the strike all we want. It's the parents. The bottom line is, parents, you need to take control of your kids. Or if you're a single parent, you need to take control of your kids. Stop sending them to school in baggy clothes. Get home and read a book to them. Let's stop as a society worrying so much about the donuts and the junk food. How about the education that they're actually getting in the classroom? We need to get our priorities straight and address these issues head on. And parents, it begins with you at home.
Just say no. All right, we'll be right back with another segment. Hi, welcome back to this week's episode of The Point. I'm the guest host, Jimmy Dore, and right now we're going to talk about lying and politicians and the journalists who love them. Right now, let's go to a clip from Face the Nation. Here's David Axelrod complaining about the mistruths or untruths spoken by Mitt Romney, and let's watch Bob Schieffer's reaction.
I'm just going to start, Mr. Axelrod, with the obvious question. What happened?
Well, what happened was the president showed up with the intent of answering questions and having a discussion, an honest discussion about where we go as a country. And Governor Romney showed up to deliver a performance, and he delivered a very good performance. It was completely unrooted in fact. It was completely unrooted in the positions he's taken before, and he spent 90 minutes trying to undo 2 years of campaigning on that stage, but he did it very well.
What are you saying that Governor Romney lied or was dishonest?
Well, yeah, I think he was dishonest, absolutely. When he said he never proposed $5 trillion in tax cuts, that was dishonest. He said on the broadcast to 70 million Americans, I will repeal Obamacare, but I will still be able to cover people with pre-existing conditions. And 10 minutes after the debate, he sent someone into the press room to say, well, you know, he really didn't mean that. He said, I want more teachers. I love teachers. It was just a few weeks ago when he stood on a platform and chastised the president for saying we needed more teachers. He said, we don't need more teachers. We don't need more government. So, yes, I'm saying that he was dishonest. Yes,
Would you go so far as to say lied?
Well, I'm not. I'm saying that he was dishonest in his answers. You can characterize that any way you want.
One of the problems I had, in fact, was with that, Carly, with all due respect, was that, for example, Congressman Ryan overreached a couple of times and got caught in those overreaches. The Janesville plant, for example, which was closed in 2008, they ended up blaming it on
never overreached in his rhetoric.
And the cuts in Medicare, which were very similar to what he had in mind, taking on the president for not invoking Simpson Bowles, which I agree with him on that. I think the president made a mistake in not playing up front Simpson Bowles. He was a member of Simpson Bowles, and he voted against it, went on the floor and said it's not a good idea to do it. So I think that's a problem for the Republicans in overreaching. They can make a very good case about the last 4 years, but when they overreach, then the next day's stories are all about the course corrections that have to be made.
Yeah, overreacher, pants on fire. I don't know. So what is the problem with the media? And it's nice to see Bob Schieffer acting just as shocked as my grandmother when she found Playboy magazines in my brother's room. Okay. Oh my God, are you reading those? Oh my God, Greg Brady, are those your cigarettes in your pocket? Anyways, so let's throw it to the panel. Why do you think, let's go to our professional politician. Why do you think, my theory is that why newsmen or journalists have a hard time saying someone lied, like Bob Schieffer. I mean, it was to see him do that. It's like, oh my God. And guess what, Bob? The Pope is also Catholic and bears shit in the woods. All right, so yes, politicians lie. I say it's because if they start calling out journalists for lying, it'll never stop. It'll happen all day, every day. And so it's got to reach some super high threshold before they say it. What do you say, Paul?
Well, okay, first off, I take offense to being called a professional politician.
Oh, okay.
That's, but no, thank you for that. And I was sitting there watching Axelrod speak, and I was trying to take notes, and the first thing that popped in my mind is he looks like a overweight little Hitler, doesn't he?
He
The
does
mustache.
a little- he
Is it just
does.
me, or does everybody
I think
else?
he's very handsome.
Well,
Hitler was good looking.
well, okay. Anyway, so I think there is dishonesty on both sides, and we shouldn't expect perfection. And I think as political campaigns get heated up, there's so many people out there with so many points and facts. I mean, I'll tell you what, we all threw out 100 facts today, and I guarantee you somebody's going to fact check them, and somebody here was wrong, God forbid. But I do think the American public, at the end of the day, stop pointing at me.
She pointed at you. You were going to be wrong.
What we all have to remember here is that it's the American public that they're talking to. And they're the voters, they're smart, they're going to see through this stuff. And I think, quite honestly, they're insulted when they feel that they're being lied to.
But Jimmy, what drove me crazy with this whole thing, the fact checkers are like bean counters. Was it 5 trillion here or was it 4 trillion? Was it 7%? Was it 97%? I didn't hear anyone in the media talk about the bigger issue when Governor Romney stands up there and says that Obama is running a campaign based on anger and hatred. Anger and hatred when the man stood there with his head down because he was afraid to look like an angry black man. You could fault him for being passive and measured and cautious. Angry and hateful. And when every media outlet, maybe not the major television news, but from the New York Times to Fox News, has called Governor Romney on his sheer utter mendacity, and he could stand there and say Obama's running a campaign of lies and makes up his own facts, and the pundits can argue all they want about a point here, a point there, a dollar here, a dollar there, but no one came right out with the elephant in the room and said, Governor Romney was full of you-know-what?
Well,
I didn't hear that from anyone.
It seemed to me that after the RNC and Paul Ryan speech, the media seemed to be more more apt to go ahead and call out the inaccuracies and the lies in his speech. But it seemed like Mitt Romney at the debate, they didn't. Like, he seemed to flip-flop a couple more times, right? He said that he did have a pre-existing condition coverage in his, and he doesn't. And he said he's for teachers, and we all know he said he wasn't. So that's what I'm talking about. So when he flip-flops like that, why do you think they weren't more willing to call Mitt Romney out this time? But they were. Even Fox News called out Paul Ryan. So any ideas?
I think that the flip-flops that Romney was doing and the fact distortions were more nuanced in the debate than usual. So, it was a little harder to point at those. I actually really appreciate the bean counters and the fact checkers. While I'm watching a debate, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Politico and I'm checking because I don't know. As just a regular citizen who, it's not my job to know all those details. I don't know when they're lying and when they're not. So I walk in there assuming that everybody's going to lie.
So there also is a danger of both sides do it. And like Tom Brokaw just did, when he was talking about Paul Ryan's speech at the RNC, which was kind of Olympic for its bending of the facts, right? And so when he starts to use a term like overreach, instead of saying, hey, you're going to get into trouble when you start lying, instead of saying lying, he says overreach, and I don't think people want their newsmen to soft pedal the news.
Well, we all got in trouble as kids for using the word liar, so I think everyone's still trying to stay away from
what
that
it
word.
is?
Absolutely, we've all been punished for it.
Even David Axelrod wouldn't call him a liar, right? You saw him. He was afraid to say it.
Well, no, but behind the scenes, that's what he's insinuating.
Oh, certainly, that's what they'll insinuate it, but they won't use that word. What is it about that word, Paul?
I don't know, but here.
It's like the N-word of politics. Like you can't use it.
Here's the biggest issue of the day that we should be talking about. The Obama administration lied to us about the attack on our Americans in Libya. For many days, we had Susan Rice going up there saying it was because of a video.
Right.
We had our Americans killed. We knew that was a terrorist attack on September 11th. There are hearings going on today where state whistleblowers from the State Department. This is, to me, one of the biggest scandals under the Obama administration. Maybe they were afraid to say it was a terrorist attack, but by not doing that, they lied to the American public.
But the focus is, so why wouldn't the press say he lied?
Great point. I don't know, and I tell you, I do know. As a Republican, of course, I'm concerned about the big media,
the liberal
bias.
media.
Well, yeah, and I think
Jew-run liberal media.
But I think now we are seeing some more credibility come to this conversation because to me this issue is only going to gain steam. There's got to be accountability. Americans were killed. It was a terrorist attack. As a veteran of this country, I love this country, but to have our commander in chief as high up as Susan Rice, disingenuous.
That's another. But we're getting it.
I don't see how they could have known for sure
Let's
exactly
not talk
what
about Libya. let's keep talking about. Let's keep talking
You
about.
go with the best information you've got at the moment, and it got corrected once it was corrected. I mean, this is a
Took him
false
5
issue that
days.
Darrell
Yeah,
Issa
it
is
doesn't-
making
I
political
really-
hay out of.
Yes.
He's a well, never mind.
But the point of this segment is the failure of the Fourth Estate to keep them honest. And it doesn't seem like, lately Soledad O'Brien has been calling out politicians for their lying, and they don't like it very much. If you've been watching her go on, they'll literally yell at her to stop it. Right, and so do you think? Again, I just wish that if politicians were afraid to lie because they knew the journalists were going to call them on it, they would do it less. But Mitt Romney has been just blatantly he's taken every position you can take on abortion, every single one. There's not one left anymore, right? So he knows it won't cost, and it's not costing him. He's neck and neck in the race. So they know it doesn't matter what you say, just like the Etch-a-Sketch moment, all that. So it doesn't matter. And do you see any hope for the media to get better?
Yeah, I actually see there's a great role for internet media in this,
Yes.
in social networking, and there's a particular role they've carved out for themselves in sort of being the truth sayers, the democratization of information. I think it's contributing to this in a great way. So yeah, it'd be great if our mainstream journalists and media pundits would also call them out, but you know what? It's fine. They're being called out. And that's why the fact checkers and a lot of the Twitter feeds that you follow during these events and speeches and debates are important.
Now you made mention of the liberal media, and now most of the media is corporate, right? Corporate owned. And so the theory would be that NBC, which is also a bank, which got TARP funds, which also is a defense contractor, somehow they want to fill their news departments with these people to undermine their corporate message, and they just can't get control of them.
It's amazing how that happens.
So do you see that? I mean, can you speak to that point?
All I can tell you is what we see, I think, every day in the media. I mean, the polling of the journalists out there is pretty obvious. 70%, 70%, are registered Democrats. So
Right.
I understand that perspective. I think we need to understand that going in, that there are going to be some biased people who are going to push their own agenda, which we see across all news channels. So, but I think we may confuse people lying with just not knowing. Obama has said a lot that he had very little experience or knowledge in to be talking about in the first place during his 2008 campaign. Should we say he was lying about all the hope and change? No, I just don't think he was prepared to be president. He didn't know what he was getting into, which is why we see the things not happening today.
Oh, okay, go
He
ahead.
didn't know he was getting into a Republican Congress that put their first order of business, not putting people back to work, but putting him out of office.
He had Democrats in charge for those first 2 years, and
Not if you
nothing was
look,
done.
they couldn't get closure. They needed more
They
than
needed 2/3 on any issue.
Yeah.
But it requires leadership from the administration, and we haven't seen it.
Yeah, he didn't beat him up enough. Where is LBJ when you need him?
It's so, well, I know it, really, I know. There is something
corrupt
to
though he
Barack
was.
Obama needs to be a better leader, that's for certain, he leading from behind and all that stuff. I'm not a big fan of, although it did, anyways, it did work out in Libya, the leading from behind, because the problem with that was that George Bush kind of screwed everything up for us at the UN, so we had to get other people out in front so we could go do the Libya thing. But you didn't think I would know that much. Okay, so.
We weren't supposed to talk about Libya.
Damn it!
Full circle.
So let's just do you guys have any hope for the media? Because I just think that the corporate media is going to get more corporate and corporate until it becomes financially viable for somebody to start telling the truth. But that's the problem with the corporate. If they start telling the truth, it's going to undermine their corporate profits. Brian Williams is never going to come out and say, by the way, the guy who owns me also owns a bank and he's screwing you over. They bailed us out, but they didn't bail you out. That's never going to happen. Don't you think that is a problem as corporate media? You don't see that as a problem?
I don't, because I honestly read I try to read 5 major newspapers a day online. I've got MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, and I will flip between those all day, and I can see the different paradigms. I have great respect for Bill O'Reilly. I don't see who couldn't. I think he gets blasted consistently, but I think he's fair. He calls out both parties, and he wants direct honesty.
The moon. How'd the moon get there?
What moon are you talking about?
Tide goes in, tide goes out. You can't explain it.
It happens.
It's Bill O'Reilly. Okay. Well, that's the end of our segment. Any closing thoughts on the media? Anybody want to say one last thing before we say goodbye? Okay, I guess that's a no.
I do have one quick item.
Oh, sure.
I just want to give
a
quick plug.
Oh, sure.
This is really, it's a nonprofit. What we're trying to do is keep kids off of drugs, and so we have launched a non-punitive student drug testing program out there that parents can get involved with to help keep their young kids off of drugs. There's no jail, Nobody's going to prison in this. It's just about getting them the intervention at a very young age, and that's what we're working towards. So the website is tbac.us for takebackamerica.us.
Okay.
And if I
God
could just
bless.
say, we will do everything in our power to defeat student drug testing in this state and across the country and anywhere else that it may come up. It's a huge infringement on civil liberties and on students and parents' rights.
Oh, see, we ended good.
War on poverty instead of war on drugs.
Thank
Very
you.
nice. Okay, I want to thank my panelists, Lynne Lyman, Paul Chabot, and Diane Lefer. You guys were great. This was
Thanks
a great
for having
panel.
us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for
I want to
having
also
us.
thank Stephen Downing of the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. For more information on LEAP, go to leap.cc. And thanks to Deborah Meier for her video on the Chicago teacher strike. You can visit her at deborahmeier.com. And as always, please leave your comments right below right here. We like to hear what you guys have to say, even the ones that question my sexuality. I like those too. All right, I'm your host, Jimmy Dore, for this week's. Thanks for watching The Point.